Alright, this short video, at least by Mr. Burton standards, is going to provide you with a little more detail about the different classes of plant hormones that are used actually for the plant to basically communicate within the plant, with its other parts and things. So just as humans have an endocrine system that we'll learn here soon enough to allow chemical communication through parts of the body, plants have a hormone system that allows them to sort of communicate within their body and gives them some different physiological effects. So the first major class of hormones is called the auxins, or auxin. We think it's really just one hormone here. And auxin, as you saw in the previous notes, is really the first plant hormone that was discovered. And this is, technically today, the chemical name for this is indole acetic acid, IAA, but everybody still refers to it as auxin. And auxin is produced in the growing tip of a plant. And so then it is transported from cell to cell down the stem to the lower parts of the plant. And if you look at the previous notes, this is the main hormone involved in phototropism, growing towards the light. When light is sensed by the tip of the plant, then auxin is sent lower and growth occurs on one side of the plant or the other, depending on where the light is coming from. So primarily the job of auxin is to stimulate the elongation of cells, like it says right here. Right, so this is your major job that auxin will do. Auxin also sets up phyllotaxy, which is the pattern of leaves on the stem. So different concentrations of auxin will lead to different sort of leaf arrangements on a plant. It also helps to regulate root formation, development of fruits, development of flowers. And so auxin today is obviously a natural thing that we see in plants, but we also have synthetic versions made in the lab that we can use to help plant cuttings grow and survive. So you could put a cutting from a plant into a little dish of synthetic auxin, and it'll help keep that cutting alive and help it to grow. But notice here too, you can also overdose a plant with auxin, and it'll cause it to kill the plant. So it also is sometimes used as an herbicide if we want to get rid of a plant by giving it a very high concentration of auxin. But for the most part, auxin is a positive growth regulator, right? It increases growth and development of the plant. Now the second group, another positive regulator, are the cytokinins. And they name the cytokinins after the process cytokinesis, because cytokinins appear to increase the rate of cell division. These are going to be produced in anything that's actively growing in a plant, and it's going to lead to more cell division. But what scientists realize too is that it also, the cytokinin group is always paired with auxin. So if you don't have auxin, cytokinin won't do too much for you. But if you do have auxin in the plant, then the cytokinins will increase cell division and cause development to progress. Now, one of the major jobs of the cytokinins is to control apical dominance. Now, this is the idea that a plant will generally grow at the apical tip before it grows from its axillary buds. So in other words, elongation of the plant, so height of the stem of the plant is sort of like the top priority. So it says here you've got an apical bud here at the tip of a plant. That is going to grow vertically before you see growth by these axillary branches. And so cytokinins help to keep this in order so that the plant tends to grow taller before it starts shooting off too many branches and growing too many leaves. Cytokinins are also involved in anti-aging effects. So essentially, a plant will stay green longer if it has cytokinins in it. Keeps the proteins from breaking down, slows down the natural cell death of apoptosis. And so if you have leaves or cuttings or even vegetables and you soak them in cytokinins, they're going to stay green longer. Our third group of plant hormones, which are also still positive regulators, are the Gibberellins, which I think are the most fun one to say. There's over 100 different types of Gibberellins found in nature, and that's found. So there's probably more than 100 different types that haven't, others that haven't been identified yet. And gibberellins are primarily going to be created by really young plants, and then young growth from older plants. So young roots, young leaves. And scientists today say that gibberellins are probably the major growth-stimulating hormone that there is. So even though we've known about auxin forever and cytokinins are also important, gibberellins probably lead to the most growth in a plant. This not only stimulates cell elongation, like auxin did, but it also stimulates cell division, like cytokinins did. So technically the gibberellins kind of do both the jobs of auxin and cytokinins combined. Now one of the major ways that we use gibberellins today is seen here, and that is to stimulate the growth of fruits. Notice here, on the left-hand side of this is really what grapes tend to grow like in terms of their size and shape. Grapes you'd use to make wine, or grapes if you tried to grow some in your backyard, would probably be little round balls like that. This is what a lot of white grapes look like in the grocery store, right? Elongated, bigger. And that's because they've been treated with extra gibberellins, which cause an increase in the fruit growth. And there are actually a couple different fruits that we do this with in terms of supermarket fruits. Now, gibberellins are also released by the brand new embryo once germination gets started. This helps stimulate the germination and cause it to progress forward and develop that new plant. In fact, scientists have treated seeds with gibberellins even when environmental conditions aren't great. So give the seed a little bit of water and some gibberellins, and it'll germinate even if it shouldn't based on the environment that it's in. Our fourth and fifth classes of hormones are also both positive growth regulators still. And these are ones that scientists don't know quite as much about. These are kind of newer hormones, at least in terms of our knowledge of them. So who knows how long plants have had them, but they are the newer kind of groups here. The fourth group here is the brassinosteroids. Brassinosteroids are a lot like cholesterol and sex hormones in animals. So this is almost a lipid-like hormone, which is what those hormones are for us. Brassinosteroids in plants stimulate cell elongation and a little bit of cell division in the stem primarily. And so note this right here. This was really just believed to be an activity of auxin before. Only recently have they separated out brassinosteroids as their own class and started to study them better to see how they differ from auxin. But otherwise, pretty much positive growth, just like an auxin. The fifth one is one of my favorites, the Striga Lactones. Striga Lactones are primarily going to stimulate germination in seeds, so they're going to be produced very, very early in the life of a new plant. Striga Lactones also probably help with apical dominance that we saw earlier. So just like the cytokinins, they help cause cells to grow vertically. But what makes this interesting is the name of these. So Striga is actually a type of plant, and it's a unique type of plant that is parasitic. So Striga is a rootless plant that doesn't have its own roots, but it penetrates the root system of another plant and uses it to soak its nutrients and water from the soil. Striga lactones were first identified, these hormones, as the chemical from the host plant that actually stimulates the Striga plant to develop more. So basically Striga lactones are also kind of stolen from the host plant here. Now why is that so interesting? A Striga is pictured here. Striga is a vampire-like creature from Romanian folklore that lives for thousands of years but stays in hiding except for every 25 years when it comes out and feeds on humans and drinks their blood in a parasitic type fashion. And so these scientists, who are clearly Romanian historians and wanted to be a little clever, named this parasitic plant after this monster from folklore. Now, the primary inhibitory plant hormone is abscisic acid, or ABA. So unlike really all the others that we've looked at so far, this has a negative effect on growth. Now don't think that that means that this kills it or anything like that. It's just this hormone slows down growth, and you need that to happen too, right? Growth and development are great, but sometimes you need to slow them up a little bit. And so abscisic acid does a few different things that lend to slowing down growth. First thing is abscisic acid is used to lead to seed dormancy. So when a plant produces seeds and then they get to their certain developmental stage and they go dormant, abscisic acid is involved in that process. And then the levels of abscisic acid are maintained in that seed to keep it from germinating at the wrong time. So in other words, this is sort of protective, right? Abscisic acid keeps a seed from germinating when it shouldn't. Now what you'll notice then is there is a balance between abscisic acid and those growth-promoting gibberellins. So whenever the gibberellins get to a higher concentration and abscisic acid is at a lower concentration, then the seed will actually germinate and a new plant can be developed. Now abscisic acid is also really important in drought tolerance. So for a plant to survive not having enough water. Earlier in the notes we mentioned that abscisic acid could cause the plant to close its stomata, which will help preserve water in the plant. Now this involves a second messenger system that involves removing potassium out of these cells. So if potassium leaves the cells, right, then water follows. Right, this sounds familiar, first semester. Right, water follows the solute, leaving those guard cells flaccid and closing off the stomatal pore. Now, otherwise, the plant opens and closes its stomata based purely on osmosis, water in, water out, leading to turgid cells or flaccid cells. But if abscisic acid is exposed to those leaves, it causes that outpouring of potassium, which causes the outpouring of water and causes the stomata to close. Now, the seventh and final hormone that we want to learn about here is ethylene. And ethylene, we kind of say, has all kinds of jobs. So it's not just purely positive for growth or negative for growth. Ethylene is a gaseous hormone, so the plant can release this into the atmosphere, and it will affect the plant in many different ways. So we're going to take a look at 4 of these ways. One is called the triple response to mechanical stress. Whenever a plant becomes physically stressed, it will release ethylene. And ethylene causes 3 things to happen. So that's what we call it, the triple response. The first thing is it slows down growth, so that would be kind of a negative thing, right? It thickens and strengthens the base of the stem, and then it leads to specific growth, so now this is a little bit positive, that forms a curvature along with horizontal growth instead of vertical growth. So you get something like this, right? And the way this works is I like to call this evasive maneuvers, right? If a plant is growing vertically, and let's say it's growing underneath your deck at home, okay? So I've got this plant, and it is growing under my deck here. I'll draw my deck in some way. If the plant hits the deck, and it can't grow any higher, that'll stress it out a little bit, and it'll put it into the triple response. So it slows down growth. Instead of trying to keep growing against that deck, it slows down. It thickens the stem to make it sturdier, and it elicits horizontal growth. Now, whenever it is free of that obstacle, it'll start to grow vertically again. So this plant will curve out of the way and then grow up. So you might have seen this before. Maybe there's a weed growing underneath your deck at home, and it'll be growing up, and then it'll run along the bottom of the underside of the deck, and then it'll pop up through one of the cracks or on the side. And this is because of ethylene and getting this triple response. Now the second thing ethylene will do is it will lead to senescence, programmed cell death. Right? So this will increase apoptosis in the plant, and if necessary, it will go to the extent of actually killing the plant sometimes. So again, if a plant has a disease or something like this, it'll start to release a lot of ethylene, and the plant will senesce, which means that it slowly goes to death. The third thing that ethylene is involved in strongly is leaf abscission, or losing your leaves, that we're real familiar with here in our part of the country in the fall. Loss of leaves from deciduous trees helps prevent the tree from desiccating and basically getting all nasty. It's the best way to think of it when the climate changes, right? So when it starts to get colder, shorter days, more precipitation sometimes too, the plant could easily begin to rot or things if it has a whole lot of real squishy tissue like leaves, right? So those leaves will themselves senesce, right? Or they will be they will go through abscission where they're lost. When this occurs, the ethylene ratio goes up, or the ethylene amount goes up, while auxin levels go down. And what this causes the plant to do is store essential elements and then separate leaves from twigs. So you see here it forms this sort of what we call an abscission layer here, and then it allows a cracking or a breaking near it. Anything the plant really needed, any nutrients and things, would be stored here in the stem, and then the leaf is allowed to change color and fall off. And this is involved with a high amount of ethylene as well. Now the last thing is what most people know about ethylene, if they know anything, and that is that ethylene causes ripening of fruit. And ethylene is the enzyme, we kind of mentioned this earlier in the notes too, but is one of the primary enzymes that leads the plants to the plant cells to sort of rupture. The cell walls break down, making the fruit softer, and when that happens, some sugars are released and will also be converted into different kinds of sugars, which causes sweetening. So color changes as well, but primarily when something ripens, it's going to become sweeter and it's going to become softer and easier to eat. Now ethylene, in terms of ripening, works like a chain reaction. So the more the fruit ripens, the more ethylene it releases. So it will continue to ripen and ripen and ripen until eventually it will kind of go bad, right? And its tissues will get too soft and it will break down and rot. Now because of this being a gas that's just open to the atmosphere, a ripening cue in one fruit can cause other fruits to ripen as well. So for instance, if you want a fruit to ripen, let's say you want a pear to ripen for you, put it in a closed container with a banana that's sort of at the mid-level of ripening. It's going to help that pear ripen as well because the banana will be releasing ethylene. In other situations, if you maybe are trying to sell fruit, you can store fruit with really good air circulation to carry the ethylene away, or with artificially increased levels of carbon dioxide, which inhibits ethylene, and that'll prevent the fruit from ripening. So if you've ever kind of wondered before, well, all these fruits are grown in Hawaii and things and then shipped here. Well, the way they do this is they alter the environment to inhibit ripening until it gets here and hits the store, so to help them stay fresh longer. So that's some information on hormones. I honestly don't think a real excess of this information will appear on the real AP exam, but it is fair game. So you want to study it for our Unit 8 test and be prepared to know a little bit about these things when you approach that real test in May. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in class.